Hi, welcome to the recording of the Congressional Scorecard. I'm here with Georgette and Holly, who have spent a tremendous amount of time working on this amazing project. And I would like to turn it over to Georgette to provide some overview information. She's going to give a screen share through the scorecard and the guide, and then we're just going to go through a few brief frequently asked questions that might come up. So Georgette, I'm going to have you take it away.
Great. Thanks, Tracy. And before I pull up the scorecard, just to give a little bit of background, our goal for putting together this tool was to make it really easy for state captains and for advocates to get information about the members that they're going to be meeting with on Advocacy Day. So rather than having to pull data from a member's website or Google individual pieces of legislation on congress.gov, we have everything included in the scorecard for you. So it's a great resource as you're preparing for your meetings. So with that, I will pull up the scorecard. All right, so you should be looking at this. You can access it on the link. Before we get started going through this, I'll flag that this is a document where the data is changing pretty much every day. So definitely keep checking closer to Advocacy Day, because there will be new inputs, new data, new people signing on to bills, even new members of Congress. We just had a special election in New Mexico two days ago. That member has yet to be sworn in, but will probably be sworn in before Advocacy Day. So just keep checking closer, and there will be new data here for you to consider as you prepare for your meetings. So just a quick walkthrough of the scorecard. You'll see here that the members of Congress here, House and Senate, are organized by state delegation. So it's all alphabetical. If you're looking for your state, you can scroll down. Those orange bars have the state names and territories as well. So you'll be able to easily find your state. Generally, we have senators listed first, followed by all of the representatives in that delegation. You'll not only have their names, you'll have the state, and for members of the House, the congressional district they represent, as well as which party they are a member of, if they're a Republican, a Democrat, in a couple of cases, independents, but color-coded to show you which party they caucus with. This status column here will tell you a little bit about if they're a senator when they're up for re-election again. Senators run once every 6 years. Sometimes when you have a member who is up for re-election, it can be a little bit easier to persuade them to sign on to legislation. So it's a helpful little tidbit there for you to know as you go into your meetings. You also have for your House members coding to show which members are new members, meaning that this is their first time serving in Congress, and members that are incumbents, meaning that they served in the previous Congress and perhaps have a record on some of the issues we're going to be advocating on in our meetings. So you have all of that information for every single member of Congress. Moving over to the right here, we have a 116th Congress session. This is the Congress that met for the 2 years before this most recent Congress, the 117th Congress, started in January. So you will have data populated here for members that have a record on issues that we've lobbied on. So you can see here if this office participated in Advocacy Day last year. Generally, the way that we request these meetings is that when we have a constituent, we request a meeting with both of their senators and their House member. So most of these are an indication of where our advocates come from last year's Advocacy Day. In some cases, you also have to keep in mind last year's Advocacy Day, we were all kind of transitioning to this virtual setting. And so there were some offices that hadn't quite made that transition yet and maybe just weren't available to meet. So that, could also be reflected in this column here. Last year during Advocacy Day, we were advocating for 5 different pieces of legislation. These are all outlined here with the bill numbers from the 116th Congress. If you scroll down, an X in the column here indicates that that particular member was a co-sponsor of that piece of legislation, means that they're generally supportive, of the bill. The goal is always to collect as many co-sponsors from both parties as possible, because that increases your chances of a bill making its way to the floor. So we've tracked all of that data from the 116th Congress for the Adoption Tax Credit Refundability Act, the Access to Infertility Treatment and Care Act, the Women, Veterans, and Families Health Services Act, the Every Child Deserves a Family Act, and last year's PCOS Awareness Month resolution. So you might be wondering, why is this data important? That was an old Congress. This is going to be especially helpful when we get to the bills from the 117th Congress that are on the agenda for this year's Advocacy Day meetings. Some of them are repeat bills that were reintroduced from last year. So if you're going into an office, with a member, some of these bills are newer, some are even yet to be introduced. It would be great to say, hey, your boss, co-sponsored the Access to Fertility Treatment and Care Act in the 116th Congress. Can we count on his support again this year? So you will have all of that data to help build those talking points for your meeting. So moving on to the 117th Congress, this is the current Congress that we're in now. So obviously there's a little bit less data in these columns, and this is something that is going to help us measure our progress and the effectiveness of Advocacy Day, because we're hoping that after all of our hard work that we'll be able to add some more X's into these columns. So as you will see, there are a number of different bills here. There's 9 total. On Advocacy Day, we're going to be focusing on these 4 right here in the darker green box. So the first one is the Access to Infertility Treatment and Care Act. This bill has yet to be introduced. We are expecting it to drop in the House and the Senate sometime between now and Advocacy Day. Right now, we have just marks for the original sponsors. We're anticipating it will be Senator Booker and Congresswoman DeLauro. But hopefully, when you check the scorecard again closer to Advocacy Day, there'll be a couple more co-sponsors marked in this column. We're also going to be advocating for the Veteran Families Health Services Act. This bill has already been introduced in both the Senate and the House, so you have all of your co-sponsors marked here. The third Advocacy Day bill this year is the Adoption Tax Credit Refundability Act. So again, all of your co-sponsors are marked here. This last Advocacy Day issue is sort of a unique one, so we just wanted to call attention to it as you're reviewing the scorecard. We are seeking an increase in medical research funding to support research on conditions that lead to infertility. This is not a bill. Generally, how the appropriations process works is that, once the president puts out his budget, individual offices in Congress will submit their requests for things they would like to see in the annual appropriations bills to the appropriations committees. So Resolve, ASRM, and its partners have been talking to various offices on the Hill about the need to increase research funding. We are in the middle of the appropriations cycle right now. The president's budget just came out right before Memorial Day. So we are relying on all of you to help us collect data as this topic comes up in your meetings. The kinds of questions I might ask are, is your boss supporting this request? Can we count on your boss to weigh in with Appropriations Committee leadership to make sure this funding request is a priority? Those are things we're going to want to note in our notes from these Advocacy Day meetings so that we can add that data to the scorecard going forward. So while these are the 4 bills that we'll be focusing on for Advocacy Day, there are a couple other pieces of legislation that will be addressed in the Leave Behind materials that we're going to be providing with members and congressional staffers. So these include the Infertility Awareness Resolution, which is a resolution that was introduced exclusively in the House, the John Lewis Every Child Deserves a Family Act, the PCOS Awareness Month resolution, which is another one that we're anticipating will be introduced sometime between now and Advocacy Day. So definitely check back later for more data in this column. the Stephanie Tubbs Jones Uterine Fibroid Research and Education Act, and then the Veterans Infertility Treatment Act. These bills are all, very, very important as well. But since we're anticipating these are going to be about 30-minute meetings, we definitely wanted to make sure that we were able to, speak about some of the bills in more detail. But we can certainly offer as individual advocates or offer up Resolve, ASRM, or other partners to continue to follow up with these offices and serve as a resource on these other pieces of legislation. So once we get past the bills, if you keep scrolling, this blue sort of area of the scorecard identifies some of the important caucuses that are focused on the issues that are included in some of the bills that we'll be talking about on Advocacy Day. So generally, it's a great talking point in meetings for you to say, hey, I noticed that Congresswoman so-and-so is a member of the bipartisan Congressional PCOS caucus. I'm assuming that means she's probably going to, be supportive of our request for more medical research funding for issues like PCOS. So, this is how you can utilize this data in the scorecard to kind of just beef up those talking points for your meetings. And if you keep going, our last kind of section of the scorecard here is a really good map of which members serve on which committees. This is not an all-inclusive list of committees in the Senate and House. It's primarily the committees that have jurisdiction over some of the issues that are touched on in the Advocacy Day bills, or these are committees that have been referred the legislation that we're going to be advocating on. So we have the appropriations committees, armed services, budget committees, finance and ways and means, which handle tax issues, which is important for our adoption tax credit bill that we're lobbying on this year, the Veterans Affairs committees, and the committees in the House and Senate that have jurisdiction over healthcare. So, as you're studying up on the bills that we're going to be advocating and asking for support and co-sponsorships for in our meetings, it might be helpful to say things like, I noticed that Congressman so-and-so is a member of the House Energy and Commerce Committee, and this bill has been referred to that committee. Can we count on the congressman's support? Would he be willing to weigh in with committee leadership to express support for a hearing or a markup on this bill? And that's why we have all of this data here, so it's very handy for you. So again, this is a living, breathing document. We're going to keep adding more data as we get closer to Advocacy Day. So keep checking back. I know it's pretty overwhelming when you look at it to start, but I feel confident that the more that you look at this and sort of play with it and scroll through it, you're going to find it to be a really, really helpful resource in preparing for your Advocacy Day meetings. So if that walkthrough was not good enough, we've also put together a quick guide to sort of help you understand the scorecard, what some of the terms mean, to provide some background on those caucuses and those committees that we discussed, and also to provide, details that are aligned with some of the other materials you've seen from Resolve about this year's Advocacy Day bills. So at the very first page here, for those of you that aren't familiar with Washington, D.C. or Congress, or just need a quick brush up, we have an overview here of the 117th Congress. What is the structure of the Senate? What is the structure of the House? What is the breakdown in party control in both chambers? You'll find all of that information here, which is just useful context for going into our meetings on Advocacy Day. You'll also find a handy definitions section. So this will define all of those terms that you see across the top part of the column. So it'll tell you a little bit more about qualifications to be a senator or a member in the House of Representatives. It will remind you, if you forget, what does status mean? What it means for a member to be in cycle, be a new member, be an incumbent. It talks a little bit about how chairman and ranking members of committees are selected, so that if you're meeting with the chairman of the Appropriations Committee or the ranking member of the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, that you know a little bit about their seniority on the committee and what their role might be. Moving on, we have a quick overview here of some of the bills that we were advocating for in the 116th Congress. So this is that red column on the scorecard. And if you take a close look at these, as we mentioned, some of the bills that we're focused on this year are reintroductions of these past bills. So you can see very clearly when you're looking at the guide, which of these bills were previously introduced, which likely means that the members or staffers you're meeting with could potentially be familiar with them. We also have an overview here of the Advocacy Day legislation for this year. So really good bill summaries here. I know that state captains have been working with their state delegations on a script for Advocacy Day, but these bullets provide really good overview, as just another way to sort of think about how you're going to talk about those bills in your meetings. So we have the first 4 bills here, which are the main talking points for Advocacy Day, and then these other very important pieces of legislation that will be addressed in the Leave Behind materials, just background on all of those. For the caucus columns, that's the blue columns on the spreadsheet. This section of the guide will provide an overview of the caucus, what its mission is, what it's focused on. It will also provide a little bit of history about when the caucus was created, as well as who the leaders of the caucus are. You might be meeting with someone who's a co-chair of one of these caucuses. That usually means that their staffer is going to be pretty smart on these issues, and also that the member is most likely to be engaged on some of the issues and pro-family building legislation we're going to be talking about on Advocacy Day. Once you get through the caucus descriptions, the last thing you have here is a few notes about how to navigate those congressional committees that we talked about. So it provides you with an overview of the committees, what issues generally fall in that committee's jurisdiction. Each of these bullets will also tell you who the chairman and the ranking member is of those committees. So you'll have that information as you go into the meetings. The other thing I'll just flag is as you go through the guide and you're looking at the bills for the 117th Congress, I've also included here quick notes about which committees the bill has been referred to. So for example, the Access to Infertility Treatment and Care Act, which has not yet been introduced, but it will in the next couple of weeks, will be referred to the Senate Health Committee and the House Energy and Commerce, Oversight and Reform, Armed Services, and Veterans Affairs Committees. So when you see that, you might want to take a look at your scorecard to see which members that you're meeting with in your state delegation serve on those committees. And that would potentially mean that this could be a bigger priority for discussion in your meeting. So there's lots of information here in the guide, lots of information on the scorecard. And like I said, we're really excited to work with all of the state captains and the advocates from this year to add data and hopefully show the fruits of our labor in getting more co-sponsors on these bills. So with that, I think I'll turn it to Tracy and Holly for any questions.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for that great overview, and just wanted to, provide a few follow-up questions. So Georgette, if people have any questions, can they reach out to you, and what is the best contact to do that?
Great. Yeah, so feel free to reach out to me if you have questions about the scorecard or you see data that's missing. The best way to reach me is on email. My email address is georgette.m.kerr, Kerr, @gmail.com.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So again, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to reach out to Georgette, and myself as well is available. Another follow-up question: how often should an advocate check the scorecard for any updates leading up to Advocacy Day?
Great. So we've been generally updating the scorecard about once a week, checking for new co-sponsors. As we get closer to Advocacy Day, we're going to pick up the pace and probably update it every day, the week of Advocacy Day. We are anticipating, as I mentioned, a couple of the bills that we'll be talking about or addressed in our Leave Behind materials to be introduced right around the time of Advocacy Day. Usually when those bills are introduced, they pick up a lot of co-sponsors right away. So we're going to do the best that we can to capture all of that data for you in real time. My general advice advice is, you might want to look at the scorecard when you're meeting with your state delegation and doing your training session. But I would also look at it again the night before Advocacy Day, the morning of Advocacy Day, or even in the 5 minutes that you're logging onto the Zoom link before your meeting, just so you can see all of that data there in one place.
That's perfect. And then just a final question, thinking about, the scorecard, and I know you touched upon this a little bit in your description, how does this data in the scorecard help to sort of with your talking points and sort of cater a message to somebody based on the information that you learn through research?
I think that, one of the best things we can do other than sharing our personal stories to have a real impact is to really tailor our meetings and our talking points for the members and their staff that we're going to be meeting with. So we can make our talking points and our conversation really relevant and also show that we've done our homework by acknowledging, one, their past support for pro-family building legislation. I think that always goes a long way in starting off a meeting on the right tone. So looking at that first column is a great way to find that data and maybe include a talking point in that very intro section to your meeting. Two, we are going to be talking about some bills that maybe the member has already signed on as a co-sponsor. And so it's a great opportunity to thank them for their support. Or if they've signed on in the past and haven't signed on yet, that kind of makes it very easy for a staffer you might be meeting with to go to their boss and recommend that they sign on. So that's another great talking point to work into your conversations. Again, I think it can help us sort of prepare for the meetings, knowing which members are on which committees or on which caucuses. Generally, I think a member who serves on a committee that has jurisdiction over healthcare issues or tax issues is probably going to be a little bit more familiar with some of the issues or have more experience or knowledge. So it can also sort of help us tailor our talking points as to how detailed we need to be, how technical we might want to be, or it could take us in an opposite direction where it could also kind of make us feel like maybe the real focus for working with this member's office is going to be our personal connections and our personal stories and making this all about the state or the district. So I think that's really helpful insight as well. And as I mentioned, the guide provides, some really helpful tidbits on which bills have been referred to which committees. So it's always a great talking point as you get to the pieces in the script on each of the pieces of legislation for you to say, I know that your boss serves on the House Energy and Commerce Committee, and I know the committee has, received this particular bill. It would be great, given his leadership role on the committee, if your boss could sign on as a co-sponsor. And it would be great, as a senior member of the committee, if your boss might be, willing to talk to the chairman or the ranking member about making sure that this bill gets considered by the committee. So those are all kind of great ways that you can look at each column in the scorecard and pull that data and make it part of your talking points in your elevator pitch on Advocacy Day.
That is awesome. Thank you so much. And that's a great explanation and description of how people can utilize this great scorecard for their meetings and really cater that to whoever they're meeting with. Well, thank you so much again, Georgette and Holly, and thank you to anyone who is watching. Again, if you have any questions at all, please feel free to reach out and connect with us. We're happy to talk to you and help answer that. And we will end the recording and head out. So thank you so much again.
Great. Thank you. Happy advocating.